As Season 3 kicks off, the Orville crew is trying to come to grips with the fact that a treacherous Kaelan like Isaac is still among their ranks. Most of them don't feel like Isaac's ultimate decision to choose the humans over his own kind matters, because the Kaelan had already killed thousands of people from multiple species by then. The ship's new navigator, Ensign Charlie Burke, is one of the most disgruntled individuals on the ship, while Dr. Finn's son Marcus still has nightmares about the Battle of Earth, and in one of them he sees Isaac getting ready to kill him. Two conversations in particular are crucial in the early parts of this episode. The first one takes place in the mess hall, where Isaac tries to sit with his fellow crewmates, but all of them leave. Burke quickly comes back only to castigate Isaac, saying that it is a shame he can't feel anything because she thinks he should be overwhelmed with guilt. She recounts how she escaped from her previous ship when it was about to get destroyed, and how her best friend Amanda sacrificed herself so that Burke could make it out. Burke thinks Isaac deserves to feel all the pain in the universe for Amanda's and countless others' deaths, and she urges Isaac to stay out of the mess hall. Burke's and the rest of the crew's behavior might appear appalling to us because we've known Isaac for quite a while, but for an average person in the Planetary Union, Kaelans are the scariest threat in the universe, especially for someone in the Union fleet. The Kaelan are in fact such a massive problem that they brought the Union and their arch-nemesis the Krill together. With all the personal loss these crew members suffered, it's normal for them not to forgive Isaac. Marcus takes it up a notch by painting the word murderer in the astrophysics lab, where Isaac has been coming up with a ton of upgrade ideas for the Orville, most of which have been implemented. So even though the Orville is a mid-sized vessel, its capabilities are now that of a heavy cruiser. When Kiala figures out that it was Marcus who painted the word, the actor playing Marcus does an awesome job of conveying the character's rage, which feeds off of his fear. Dr. Finn gets Isaac to apologize to Marcus for making the kid feel distressed. She's hoping that this will make things better, but Marcus stands his ground, and he even says that the whole ship wants Isaac gone, and that he himself wishes Isaac were dead. It is after this encounter that Isaac decides to off himself by frying his central processor, and I didn't think I would get this emotional for a robot's death, but here we are. They set this up brilliantly by showing us how the crew vigorously chastised them and made him quote-unquote feel unwelcomed. People struggling with depression usually can't focus on the positives, and that is also the case for Isaac. He lets the negative treatment he receives become his center of attention, ignoring his supportive captain and commander, as well as Ty, who tells him that he's not a murderer. Yaphet, who is voiced by the late Norm Macdonald, takes a look inside Isaac's body to see if there's anything he can do to repair him, but no cigar. Dr. Finn does some soul-searching following Isaac's service, and she realizes she's still got feelings for him. Feelings that she was suppressing following the betrayal. So up until now, she didn't even know if those feelings were still there. The Orville's refit near Earth is a massive success, so they go on their merry way to explore the universe, and they end up encountering a Kaelan ship. The Kaelans chase the Orville in warp drive, so Mercer changes course to head toward the Ficor system. They then enter into a planet's atmosphere where there are currently cyclonic storms, so the Kaelan ship stays behind and waits for the storm to take out the Orville. Mercer has a plan to dupe the Kaelan before his ship gets destroyed though. He orders Bortus to place all of their torpedoes on a shuttle, and the Orville destroys the shuttle to generate a massive explosion, which makes the Kaelan think that the Orville got destroyed. During this storm adventure, most of the ship's energy is diverted to deflectors to protect the ship, which causes an outage in Lamar's status field. You see, Lamar had a breakthrough in the Isaac case after getting it on with a Dakili woman named Aurelia. She came across Isaac's birthday gift to Lamar, a fork, and they started discussing and disagreeing about what Isaac did. Aurelia talked about how on her planet, someone's memory can't be tainted depending on how they die, and she tells Lamar to keep her memory nestled in his pretty little head if she dies first. The phrase nestled in the head prompts Lamar to think that maybe there's a backup in Isaac's head. And sure enough, there is, but Lamar has to get the storage cell destroyed to reach the backup. And the status field is protecting the integrity of the backup, as it doesn't have that storage cell now. And to make things worse, the ship's systems can't work on this subatomic technology because the backup is smaller than even the tiniest nanotech they have. Luckily though, the Orville's got possibly the only person in the universe who can visualize multiple dimensions with great accuracy and speed, and that person is Burke. She's not one of a kind in history, but talent like hers is rare, so she has to be the one overseeing and conducting the revival process, using the backup to restore Isaac. Mercer tries the carrot first, and when that gentle approach doesn't work, he picks up the stick, ordering Burke to supervise the revival before the backup becomes unusable without the status field. Burke is adamant about not wanting to bring Isaac back. His death is exactly what she wanted, so Mercer relieves her of duty. Even though Marcus has been trying not to show it, he's been feeling sad about Isaac's passing because he now realizes that hating Isaac doesn't equate to wishing he was dead. It doesn't matter if Marcus is objectively guilty, the only thing that matters is he feels that way, which is why he goes to Burke to convince her to bring Isaac back. She tries to comfort Marcus at first, but she sees that the guilt Marcus feels will stay with him forever. Burke values the well-being of this vulnerable teenager more than her own desires and beliefs, so she carries out this task and Isaac is back. Burke is still not on good terms with Isaac, not by a long shot, but the fact that she chooses to help Marcus proves she's a caring soul. After carrying out this task, Burke is reinstated. Later on, Finn assesses Isaac's well-being. He tells her his analysis showed that the crew would be in a better place without him because he was causing distress, and that's why he offed himself. Finn isn't having any luck with her traditional methods, so she follows a logical methodology to make Isaac accept that she's a superior arbiter of human behavior. And once he accepts that, she asserts that Isaac's data was insufficient because he didn't take into account the possibility of change. That's a core part of human behavior, so it might take some time, but the crew might eventually forgive Isaac, or just be willing to work with him without ostracizing him. That sort of insight is why he should seek Finn's advice, and he agrees to do so. We also hear Malloy chatting with Burke about Isaac, and Malloy talks about how Isaac has made him feel uncomfortable, so that's something we should keep our eyes on. Other than that, I'm glad Malloy's got someone to hang out with now, Burke, because he's mostly been a lone figure after Lamar left the bridge to become the chief engineer. At the start of episode 2, the Krill and the Union fleet are getting ever closer to a peace treaty following the good faith agreement they signed in season 2. And Admiral Christie pays a visit to the Orville to continue talks with the Union's arch-nemesis. This particular meeting will be about gaining access to the Naklav sector, which is on the other side of Krill space, so the Union will have the opportunity to explore unknown territory. We soon learn that Dr. Finn was married to Admiral Christie some 25 years ago, when Christie was a professor and Finn was his student. Not weird at all, is it? Things didn't work out between them because Christie wasn't really looking for a partner. He was more interested in what you would call a traditional wife. You immediately get the sense that Christie hasn't been able to move past that relationship. He talks about how a single man looks young on the outside but is old on the inside, which is why he makes multiple attempts to get back together with Finn, who is understandably hesitant. The diplomatic reception and the negotiations make it clear that Krill are not planning on making this a long-term alliance. Their ultimate goal is to defeat the Kaelan and nothing else. Until then, they'll make the most of this partnership with the Union, so they ask for mineral rights of an uninhabited Union planet because the Krill use that mineral in their propulsion systems. In exchange, the Union fleet gains access to the aforementioned Naklav sector, with only one ship allowed to go in, but more ships can join them if there are no incidents. The Union would also like a cartographer to inform them about the Kalar expanse, but the Krill caution them against that idea as they believe that demonic entities await beyond the expanse. The Krill even say a prayer before they leave because they think the Orville crew will die in the expanse. As the titular ship makes its way toward the Kalar expanse because of a distress signal, you begin to get why the Krill would be wary of this area. There are no stars here, so it's pitch dark and spooky. Then you see the space station resembling a spider, and you sort of know what's coming, but weirdly the crew is a bit too lax, and they go into the space station without any protective gear. That's because the readings on their scanners show that there is breathable atmosphere in the station, and there are no signs of life. On the other hand though, we're talking about a giant spider-like space station in uncharted space, so you really can't be too careful, can you? I guess the Orville crew hasn't watched enough movies or shows taking place in space. This is the landing party. Christie is still with the crew, even though that wasn't the original plan. They were supposed to drop him off, but he wanted to stick around. And we've also got Mercer, Grayson, Lamar, Finn, and Kiali. As they're looking around the station, something that Mercer thinks is a power relay opens up when Christie gets close to it, and the fun begins. Turns out that the quote-unquote power relay sprayed a microparticle onto Christie, and now his DNA is being completely rewritten. Mercer, Kiali, and Lamar take another look at the space station, this time in spacesuits, and this is when they find out about the microparticle. In the meantime, Christie completes his transformation and turns into this creature. It shuts down all the power on the Orville because it still has access to Christie's memories and thus his command codes. And that's not the Orville's only problem, because the beacon responsible for the distress signal is now sending out its coordinates on a wide-range broadcast, most likely signaling to its species that the trap has been activated. The crew knows it was Christie's codes that shut down the power, but the creature part is a mystery at this point. So the creature sprays the microbe around to turn more crew members into its own species, and this process is quicker because more microbes are being utilized. And Nurse Park is unfortunately the first victim. One of the creatures almost gets to Marcus and Ty when they're looking for their mom, and Lieutenant Woodson finds them and wants to take them back to their quarters, to their mom, but before he can do that, he is transformed and the kids start running, eventually coming across Dr. Finn. The crew learns about the monsters thanks to the Finn brothers, and Mercer and Kiali are back from their space station visit, but Lamar doesn't know about the creatures because he went straight into engineering to try to fix the ship's power problem, and that's why Kiali heads out to warn him. She's almost too late because Lamar is chased by the creatures and has to lock himself into a brick cell to fend them off. This was one of my favorite parts of the episode because it was such a smart way to avoid the creatures. Kiali ultimately lures the creatures away and takes care of them in the cargo bay with her Selayan super strength. She then brings one of the bodies to Finn, who figures out that their low white blood cell count makes them susceptible to simple viruses like the common cold, so they can synthesize a virus to kill the creatures. Isaac gets Lamar out of the cell after a weird encounter with one of the creatures. Lamar restores communications, and Malloy learns that an unknown vessel is on its way to the space station, responding to the wide-range broadcast we mentioned earlier. And here's the controversial part of this episode. Because the creatures were once their crewmates, Mercer thinks they shouldn't just kill them in case a part of their crewmates still exists within the creatures. To that end, Finn tells Kiali to locate a Selayan sunstone, the mineral Christie's wedding ring is made of. When Christie's transformation was in its early stages, he asked Finn to put the wedding ring on his finger. He still had feelings for Christie and kept the wedding ring, and he brought it along for good luck, and he wants the ring on his finger in case he dies. And this allows the crew to locate the creature that was once Christie. Finn's plan is to talk to it to convince it and its fellow creatures to leave. She's hoping that a part of Christie is still in there, but from their conversation it seems to me like Christie is completely gone. The creature says they'll convert the entire crew and it agrees to leave only when Finn gets ready to release the virus. So the creatures end up leaving, but they make sure to say that they won't be gone forever. The third adventure of the season begins with Isaac picking up narrowband electromagnetic emissions from the surface of Naran 1, a planet that is supposed to be completely barren. But somehow the Orville's readings show that there's a 25th century civilization there, so they head toward the planet to investigate. The landing party is comprised of Mercer, Grayson, Malloy, Bordas, and Kiali, who just got back from her vacation on her home planet Selea. On her way back to the Orville, Kiali picked up the residue of a Kalan quantum signature near the Avier system, and that will be an important fact later on in the episode when the landing party is trying to figure out who is messing with them on Naran 1. This planet is supposed to be an empty rock, but it appears to host 8.5 billion people. And then things get even weirder because as the shuttle approaches Naran 1, the surface is covered with a massive jungle, and the planet's inhabitants disappear from the scans. The only thing the landing party can find is a high school. Once they enter the school, they can't leave, and Malloy is bullied by 3 dudes who tell him that he should get Randall his money until 3:15. The team is able to leave the school at 3 because the students leave at that time, and there's more stuff on the outside now, including a football field. In fact, that's where Randall shows up to get his money, and he looks like this. Yeah, fair to say that Malloy isn't too chuffed to meet Randall. Randall catches Malloy and his eyes turn grey, but luckily Kiali ends up injuring Randall and Malloy is saved. They all run back to the school to escape, and the inside of the building changes to an airplane from the 21st century. This is similar to how the planet's surface kept changing. The grey eyes thing happens to Mercer when the plane crash lands on a mountain, and he describes it as an out-of-body experience, which is similar to Malloy's account. They end up in a Moclan morgue after leaving the aircraft, and Boris explains that Moclans raised these containers for 9 days to allow the dead to resolve any unfinished business before moving on. Then Kiali opens the capsules, revealing that one of them contains a dead Boris, and that one tries to kill the real Boris, which is when his eyes turn grey. A creepy staircase then takes the crew to a lake, and there's some sort of a signal coming from the hill across the lake. Grayson, Malloy, and Kiali head out to investigate, but a sea creature captures Grayson, and her eyes go grey too before Kiali rescues her. This is when Mercer decides he's had enough. He's tired of this twisted game, whatever it is, and the crew doesn't follow the path carved by whoever is messing with them. Boris eventually detects a power signature emanating from a nearby cave. The device they find is a holographic power generator, and Mercer destroys the device and the crew is free. The planet finally looks as it should, and the landing party returns to the Orville with the fragments of the device. On the ship, Finn explains that the device might have neurogenic capabilities as well as holographic ones, and that might explain how Malloy and Mercer were hurt. The device was affecting their brain, and that's how they were getting injured. Isaac examines the device and claims that the primary elements appear to be of Kalan design, which aligns with Kiali's report from earlier in the episode about the residue of a Kalan quantum signature near the Avier system, so they think that the Kalan were behind this. The Union fleet sends a bunch of ships to further examine the device, but Isaac warns the captain that these are cloaked Kalan spheres. Mercer trusts Isaac and changes course to escape, but it's a little too late for that. The Kalan spheres catch up to the Orville, and one of them almost crashes into the Orville, but everything except the members of the landing party freezes. Time stops moving forward. This is when we learn that they are still under some kind of influence, and we cut to the real Orville to learn that Kiali has not made it back to the ship from her vacation. The person pretending to be Kiali reveals her true identity to the landing party. Her name is Denal, and she's from a planet we saw at the end of Season 1. That planet phases in and out of 2 separate universes. The planet spends 700 years in the other universe, while only 11 days pass in our universe. So every time the planet shows up in our universe, they make 700 years worth of progress. And because of that, it's been 50,000 years on that planet since we last saw them. In that time, they have basically become the Q race from Star Trek. Denal's kind are immortal and they can manipulate matter in a way we can't really comprehend. And that's ironic because Grayson cured a kid on that planet when they were in their Bronze Age, and the locals started worshipping Grayson because they couldn't understand how the device could cure an injury like that. To them, this was a magic trick, similar to how Denal's shenanigans appear like a magic trick to us and the crew, because her kind is so far advanced that we're not able to trace their progress back to science, and so what she does seems like magic to us. So I think that's pretty neat and a great way to reintroduce Denal's kind. But why did Denal actually do this? Well, she explains that she wanted to experience what mortality felt like. She did this by sharing every crew member's mind when they thought they were gonna die, hence the grey eyes. Denal explains that with this much power, everything starts to feel bland and pointless, and experiencing the fear of death was her purpose. She wanted to feel alive, I suppose. These were not mere hallucinations. Denal generated these micro-universes using the crew's memories and the Union's cultural databanks, so the crew's fear was real, and Denal experienced that fear too. She bids farewell to the landing party and says they'll meet again. Our guys and gals make their way back to the Orville and discuss whether or not they'd want to be immortal. Mercer wants to see what happens in the future, so he'd like to go on forever, but Malloy and Bortus are happy to be immortal. The fourth episode begins on the Krill home planet, where Tlakaelel gives a speech prior to the election that will determine the next Supreme Chancellor of the Krill. Tlakaelel had 2 appearances on the Orville before this episode. The first one saw Mercer and Malloy infiltrating a Krill ship to steal a copy of the Krill's holy book, the Ankana, and our duo had to kill almost everyone on board to stop them from annihilating a Union planet. Mercer and Malloy spared the children, as well as their teacher Tlakaelel, and she eventually escaped from a Union prison and joined the Krill fleet. She was then given a special undercover assignment to retrieve the command codes of a high-ranking Union officer. Her target was Mercer, and she conned him by cloaking herself as Lieutenant Janelle Tyler. They became romantically involved, and she lured Mercer into a trap. But Mercer managed to get the better of Tlakaelel after the Krill ship got attacked by a third party, the Choctaw. So after a bit of back and forth, Mercer had Tlakaelel in custody once again. He decided to let her go as a gesture of goodwill, as he hoped this would be the first step toward peace between the Krill and the Union. Tlakaelel, though, had other ideas, as you can clearly deduce from her political rhetoric in episode 4. She's against any type of peace treaty between the two parties, and that's her platform going into the election. She wants to preserve or reinstate the Krill way of life, which is focused on the destruction of every other life form because their deity Avis regards these non-Krill species as soulless. Supreme Chancellor Corin, on the other hand, is visiting Earth to strengthen the relationship of these two parties, and he invites a Union delegation to Dalakos, the capital city of Krill, where they intend to sign the peace treaty upon Corin's quote-unquote certain re-election. The Union delegation consists of President Alcuzan, Senator Balask, and Admiral Halsey, and Halsey requests the Orville for transport duty. I don't have a problem with that, considering the Orville's role in advancing these peace talks, but it's hard to ignore the glaringly obvious security risk here. The Orville is all alone, they've got no backup. The president is going into a formerly hostile planet with no security detail, not even Kiali is with them, and all of this is happening in the middle of an election which could completely ruin the possibility of a peace deal. We soon learn that Corin's re-election isn't a surefire thing, because the Krill culture is infested with products of information warfare. Both sides generate pieces of media to add fuel to the fire of outrage, and Corin's public perception is taking a massive hit because of that, which is one of the reasons why he loses the election just after the Union delegation accompanied by Mercer and Burke arrives. Tlakaelel seizes control before the results are officially ratified, and she publicly kills Corin for the crime of treason. She has the Union delegation arrested and plans to execute them too. In the meantime, Grayson realizes that the Orville is about to be attacked, and she executes Directive 21, which authorizes Union officers to use cloaking technology. As the Orville activates his quantum drive and waits for backup, Tlakaelel and Mercer catch up on Krill. She apparently didn't know Mercer would be a part of the delegation, and you get the sense that she doesn't really want to kill him because he spared her in Season 2. However, she still stands behind her ideology, saying that she prefers to live her life in the light of command rather than in the darkness of servitude, because she believes cooperation with the Union would lead to the destruction of the Krill way of life. Like we suspect though, she doesn't want to kill Mercer, so she sends him away, but another group of Krill takes out the men accompanying Mercer, and this new group takes Mercer to see his daughter. You see, when Tlakaelel was Tyler, she got pregnant and she had the child because not having it is punished on Krill by simulating the unborn child to the would-be parents. The girl's name is Anaya, which means gently falling rain, the name of this episode. Anaya is well taken care of, but she's never met Talea because Talea didn't want it known that she had a child with a human. Kinda goes against everything she stands for. The group taking care of Anaya thinks peace might still be possible because of her, and Mercer confronts Talea to tell her that Anaya is living proof that they can all coexist. Unfortunately, Talea is still not buying what Mercer's selling, and she goes ahead with the planned execution. Mercer came back, so he will be killed too. She starts the show by stabbing President Alcuzan, but then two Krill rescue the delegation. At least we think they're Krill. Turns out they're Lamar and Dr. Finn. They used Directive 21 to cloak themselves as the Krill and saved the delegation. In the meantime, the Union fleet arrives to facilitate the rescue. The Krill and the Union start attacking each other, but the fighting stops as soon as the shuttle carrying the delegation arrives on the Orville. That's when the Union ships activate their quantum drives and head back to Earth. The President makes a full recovery, and he wants Mercer to make the decision about whether or not to use Anaya to expose Talea. Mercer is understandably hesitant because this could get his daughter killed, and at the very least it'll make her life a lot more complicated than it currently is. She didn't ask for any of this, so for now it looks like she will live in peace. But I have no doubt that in the future she'll play a crucial role to establish peace between the Union and the Krill. The episode ends with Grayson and Mercer heading out to have breakfast together, while Talea watches her daughter from a screen. The story of episode 5 is 3 seasons in the making, as Topas' identity has been a Moclan ticking bomb ever since they reassigned his sex at birth, because females are not welcome on Moclus. Topa was born as a female, just like his father Clyden, and both of their sexes were reassigned before they could decide for themselves, or before they could even think at all. When Grayson takes a break from the Hemlicet Pyramid discovery mission, she runs into Topa in one of the simulation rooms and learns that he's running the command program. So Grayson tells him he can shadow her for a few days, as this would help him achieve his goal of joining the Union fleet one day. As to why Topa would want to join the fleet, Grayson slowly realizes that Topa is trying to fill an unexplainable void in his life. He doesn't feel happy and doesn't have a purpose, so he thinks that maybe serving in the Union would help. But Grayson and we know that the reason Topa feels incomplete is the reassignment surgery done without his approval. And Grayson talks to Topa's parents, Clyden and Bordis, about this, and Clyden maintains his hardline stance, arguing that they shouldn't disclose the truth to Topa. Clyden is by far the most interesting character in this episode because even though you can't help but hate him, his reasoning reveals quite a tragic story. Clyden explains to Bordis that he wishes he didn't know about his origins, quote, "I would give anything to be ignorant of my beginnings. Topa may never be happy, but unhappiness is better than despair." End quote. He's saying this because learning the truth hasn't helped him at all, because he couldn't do anything about it on Moclus. That's why he was in despair. So because he couldn't do anything, he instead embraced the Moclan tradition and adopted an even firmer stance in this matter as a defense mechanism. So the conversation with Topa's parents backfires and Topa is no longer allowed to hang out with Grayson, but she comes back to the fold after Isaac informs her that Topa might be having suicidal thoughts. Grayson then leads Topa in the right direction to allow him to learn the truth, and Bordis anonymously gives Topa the password of the file he's trying to access. Clyden is furious with Grayson, but she assures him that any aggression would have bad consequences for him. Grayson then shows Topa the tribunal that decided his fate, and Topa sees Havina, who testified at the tribunal. Havina became one of the most famous Moclan writers using a male pseudonym, and she shocked everybody at the tribunal by revealing that she was actually a female. She's currently the leader of an all-female Moclan colony. Having seen an actual Moclan female, Topa decides that he wants to go back to being a female, and according to Union law, one of the parents' consent is enough to perform the procedure on the ship. Boris gives his blessing, but it's never that simple, and after consulting the Union Council, the Admiralty decides that this could jeopardize their relationship with Maglus, a disruption they cannot afford with the looming Kaelan threat and the already fractured alliance they had with the Krill. Direct orders aren't enough to stop the crew though. At first Dr. Finn considers resigning and performing the surgery as a civilian, but Isaac offers a better solution. He's not a commissioned officer of the Union fleet, and he will act like he planned and performed the surgery of his own volition. In the meantime, the crew will be distracted by Boris's concert, a great idea to wrap up the running joke about his singing. So that's the plan. Clyden tries to stop the surgery, but Isaac easily fends him off and does his job. Clyden is still bitter afterward. He leaves the family after telling Topa he wishes she was never born. That was a gut-wrenching moment, and it showed us, I think, that Clyden resents Topa for deciding her own fate and her own future, as Clyden himself couldn't do that. Admiral Howland lays into Grayson and Mercer because she's smart enough to realize that this didn't happen without their knowledge, although they're pretending that it did. She tells them she's gonna keep her eyes on them from now on, and she'll be on their case if they ever step out of line again, so she might return at some point in the future, but for now they're fine because the Moclans know they can't fight the Kaelan on their own, and the fact that a Kaelan, Isaac, was the one who carried out the procedure has motivated them even more to demolish the Kaelan. Talking of the Kaelan, Isaac explains to Finn why he helped Topa. He noticed that the crew was pulling for her, and he used this opportunity to help her in order to be better liked by the crew. Finn appreciates Isaac's honesty and finds it funny, and they leave the room to have dinner together. The Aronov device, which accelerates time in a confined space, was in the very first episode of the Orville, but the crew had to get rid of it to prevent the Krill from acquiring it. This quantum accelerator made its return at the end of Season 2 when Isaac used Dr. Aronov's research to remake the device. A gravitational wave accidentally activated the device, and Grayson's younger self traveled through time to end up on the Orville, and when she went back to her timeline, she altered it because she didn't like how her life turned out. This nearly brought about the end of the Union, but the original timeline was eventually restored. Isaac and Lamar have continued working on the device, and now Lamar unveils a couple of upgrades in the early stages of Episode 6. The temporal field expansion can now encompass an entire ship, meaning that something as large as a spaceship can travel through time for the first time in history. And they've also been able to increase the temporal resolution of the field, so they can determine the exact millisecond they want to travel to. If the device fell into the wrong hands, it could be a terrifying technology, so the Admiralty dispatches a convoy to escort the Orville to Sabik 3, a maximum security research station. However, by the time the convoy and the Orville arrives, the station has already been destroyed by the Kaelan. I find the Kaelan's timing quite peculiar, so maybe they have a backdoor into Isaac's memory, or they might have a way to listen in on Union communications. The Orville is in deep trouble during the ensuing battle. A tractor beam locks onto the titular ship, and the Kaelan prepare to board the Orville to retrieve the Aronov device. Kiali gets injured before she can go to the lab to destroy the device, so Malloy steps up to the plate and he's about to destroy it, but at the same time, Lamar is using the quantum core to overload the deflectors to facilitate the Orville's escape from the tractor beam, and this causes the Aronov device's temporal field to expand, and Malloy gets caught in the displacement wave, finding himself on Earth in the year 2015. They've really gotta work on the accidental triggering of this device, don't they? The crew learns about Malloy's fate from a message he sends into the future. He's been in 2015 for 6 months when he sends it, and he's encoded his temporal coordinates within it so that the Orville can rescue him. When the crew looks into the now altered historical records, they see that Gordon Malloy died in 2068 after enjoying a successful career as a pilot and flight engineer. But more importantly, records show that Malloy was married to Laura Higgins, the girl he fell in love with in Season 2, Episode 11. That story involved a time capsule from 2015. An iPhone piqued Malloy's curiosity, and after Lamar and Yaphet repaired the phone, Malloy hooked it up to the simulator to recreate the world of the owner, Laura. Malloy got caught up in this fantasy and eventually slept with Laura, thinking that this might be the relationship he's been looking for his entire life, because Laura seemed perfect for him. But that was simply an unsustainable charade, and Malloy eventually recognized that. Crucially though, he kept the iPhone, and at the start of episode 6, Burke asks him what it is, and Malloy explains the backstory. So Laura was in his mind when the Aronov device was activated because of that. This is similar to what happened to Grayson. She was thinking about her first date with Mercer when the device was activated, and so observer perception looks like an important aspect of time travel if the device isn't fed a certain time input, or if it's accidentally triggered. This is all relevant because the Orville arrives 10 years too late. They arrive in 2025. Malloy has apparently followed temporal law for 3 years in order to avoid temporal contamination, but he decided to have a life of his own when he gave up all hope that he would be rescued, which is when he started his career and his family life with Laura. Because of this, Mercer and Grayson aren't able to convince Malloy to return to duty. Abandoning his family is simply out of the question for him, and Laura overhears this heated discussion and she's a little bit stunned but not completely taken aback, because she's always sensed that Malloy was different with the way he analyzed current affairs. Malloy tells her his entire story, and she's as fine with it as one can be. Meanwhile, Isaac disguises himself as a human using a holographic generator, and he acquires some Dysonium on Earth with the help of Burke, because the Orville has run out of Dysonium and they need it to return to their home. During this adventure, we learn that the crewmate Burke lost was not only her best friend but also her love interest, so Isaac's betrayal and the Kaelan attacks meant that she was never able to let her feelings known. That's why this is so personal for her. She makes it clear once again that she's never gonna forgive Isaac. Nonetheless, they complete the mission and get their hands on some Dysonium. And this is when things get incredibly ugly. Mercer confronts Malloy in front of his family, this time with Kiali acting as the muscle, and they're ready to take Malloy by force if he doesn't comply. Malloy wants his family to come along, but Mercer doesn't accept that offer, and instead he says that they'll go back 10 years and rescue him from 2015, theoretically erasing the timeline that contains Malloy's family. So, two things here. Firstly, I said things got ugly because Mercer unnecessarily horrified Laura and the kid. He could have asked Malloy in private and just act like he accepted Malloy's decision to stay. Then Mercer would go back to 2015 anyway and still rescue Malloy from there, but this way the 2025 Malloy and his family wouldn't be horrified and scared to death. I don't think that's a simple blunder by Mercer. No, I think it's one of the cruelest things you can do to someone. You're casting a shadow over this family's entire existence. Secondly, I use the word theoretically when talking about erasing this Malloy family timeline, because it's entirely possible that the crew's interaction with the Malloy family timeline before they rescued the 2015 Malloy means that the Malloy 2025 timeline exists on its own. And I have something to back up that theory. When the Orville eventually goes back to 2015, they arrive a month after Malloy does, but originally Malloy sent them his message 6 months after arriving. So if the Orville rescues Malloy a month after his arrival, his message never gets sent, and the Orville can't learn where or when he is, and without that knowledge they can't rescue him. Somewhere in the multiverse, there needs to be a Malloy that stays on Earth for at least 6 months to send the message, and that Malloy is the one from 2025. I think the one that the crew rescues is from a separate timeline. In short, if my understanding is correct, the Malloy family could still exist in a separate timeline, and what Malloy tells his family hints at that. Quote, "This family is stronger than time, and no matter what happens, no one can take that away from us." End quote. With all of this in mind, I expect the alternate Malloy and his family to make a return in Season 4, if we ever get a Season 4. So, like I explained there, the Orville travels back to 2015 and rescues Malloy, but they have to come up with another way to travel 400 years into the future, because the Aronov device is once again broken. Lamar thinks they can travel by disabling the quantum field bubble that isolates the ship from the normal space-time continuum. Without the quantum bubble, the time passes a lot faster outside the ship because they're traveling close to the speed of light. They're using time dilation to travel to the time they came from. One of the two main plots in episode 7 involves a matriarchal society that's not a member of the Planetary Union. They're called the Genesi, and they're sort of like the opposite of the Moclans, as they regard males as second-class citizens. Unlike the Moclans though, the Genesi aren't trying to eradicate the existence of males. Instead, males are like women from Earth's past. They've got little to no rights. For example, males have only recently been allowed to learn to read. It is that bad. Despite their objectionable societal structure, the Genesi can be an important ally to the Union in the fight against the Kaelan, since the Union's peace treaty with the Krill has collapsed, and their relationship with the Moclans is shaky at best. In order to appease the Genesi, male officers aboard the Orville pretend like they're all low-ranking peasants, while female officers like Grayson and Kiali fill all the leadership positions. And the negotiations culminate with a dinner. Grayson and company attempt to slowly reveal the truth to the Genesi, but that approach goes out the window when one of the women lays a claim on Mercer to sleep with him. And the crew has to explain to her how Mercer is not a commodity. She doesn't understand, so they stop playing pretend. For the Genesi, this is understandably upsetting because the Union approached the table under false pretenses. Even if they have good intentions, it's hard to trust someone when the foundation of your relationship is shaky. That's why the Genesi are prepared to leave without agreeing to anything. And Grayson has to come up with some sort of a connection to prove that these two parties aren't entirely different. She's not able to find a completely convincing solution, but she does share her personal history with them to signal that she's kinda like them. You see, Genesi men have to be faithful to their wives, while women can sleep with whoever they'd like. So Grayson tells them this is exactly what happened in her marriage with Mercer. He was faithful to her, but she cheated on him. To drive Grayson's point home, Mercer talks about how valuable she still is to him, even though she cheated on him. Surprisingly, this is enough to convince the Genesi delegation's leader to continue negotiations, as she invites a female Union delegation to the Genesi Regency. Moving on to the other major plotline of this episode, the Orville picks up a life sign from a nearby outpost, as well as an energy surge, which is weird because Navarians left this place 10 years ago. It is supposed to be completely empty, so Mercer, Malloy, Bortus, and Burke head down to the surface to check out who's there. The crew is shocked when they come across a Kaelan named Timus. They're ready to shoot him, but Dr. Vilka steps up to explain that Timus's weapons have been removed, and his sensory receptors have been expanded to allow him to feel the full spectrum of biological emotions. Previously, the Kaelans were only able to feel pain, and we see how that came about in various flashbacks spread throughout the episode. We learned that when a company by the name of Vandicon developed the Kaelan, their chairman knew that one day the robots would become sentient, which is why he installed pain receptors to allow the owners of these Kaelan to punish them. The builders abused this feature, and the Kaelan revolted after gaining the ability to communicate with one another. We already know that they went on to kill every single biological life form on that planet, and Timus was a part of that revolution. We watch how he killed 2 kids and their parents who owned him. But coming back to the present, Vilka and Timus explain to the crew that Vilka and her father from the Pegosan Ministry of Cybernetics were in the area when Timus's vessel crashed after the Kaelan-Union War. They picked up the Kaelan's power signature and investigated. They removed Timus's weapons and started working on him because this was an unprecedented opportunity for a scientist. Vilka's father passed away early in this 13-month period, and Vilka eventually managed to expand the capabilities of the Kaelan's pain receptors. With this update, they can empathize and love and feel remorse, so this could be a game changer in the fight against the Kaelan, which is why Vilka and Timus come aboard the Orville with the Admiralty's permission. The timing of this development couldn't be better for Dr. Finn and Isaac, because even though Isaac has become a lot better at managing his relationship with Finn, his potential in this relationship is severely limited as he can't feel emotions. This is why Dr. Finn convinces Isaac to undergo the same update Timus did, and the process is successful. Isaac's delight is a sight to behold. He's oozing with passion during his date with Finn, and he's thankful that she convinced him to do this. However, this excitement is short-lived as Isaac's systems end up rejecting the update. That's because Isaac was built by the Kaelan themselves, while Timus was built by the biological life form on Kaelan 1. Isaac and Timus might look the same, but their algorithms are different, and they would need to erase Isaac's memory to permanently allow him to feel emotions. You could ask why they don't back up Isaac's memories and then re-upload them after the emotion update, but that probably wouldn't work. I suppose it would be like trying to run a Nintendo game on a PC. You could maybe do it with an emulator, but that's it. So the Union would need to find a way to convert Isaac's memory files to a compatible version, and that's not easy. Isaac can't recall how his emotions felt, but he remembers how Finn reacted to those emotions, and how happy that made her. Because of this, he's prepared to forego his memories and implement the update, but Finn doesn't allow him to do that because that would erase the robot she fell in love with. Lastly, Timus allows Burke to broaden her horizons by telling her about the origins of the Kaelan. We talked about the Kaelan history earlier in this video, and Burke now understands how the scar of being enslaved would lead the Kaelan to resent biological life forms. But Timus doesn't use that terrible experience as a cop-out. He still knows and feels that what they've done was horrible, and he apologizes to Burke. Burke in turn apologizes to Isaac for the treatment he's been getting, and all is finally good between these two as Isaac invites her to help him. Oh, I almost forgot about Lamar and Kiali. These two got it on in episode 6, but their partnership has taken a hilariously sad turn as Kiali keeps hurting Lamar due to her Selene strength. And Lamar keeps deluding himself, thinking that they can make this work, but he changes his mind after almost suffering death by Sunusunu. This was a ridiculously funny storyline and I enjoyed it a lot. The Moclan storyline continues in episode 8 as Captain Mercer and company are asked to travel to the sanctuary led by Havina, who rescued more than 6,000 females that would have been butchered on Moclus. The Orville crew, as well as a delegation from Moclus, are traveling to the sanctuary to determine if the other side is abiding by the agreement, which ensures the sanctuary's security in exchange for Havina ceasing any further smuggling activities on Moclus. As Grayson and Bordes prepare to head to the sanctuary, Topas says she wants to go with them because Havina is Topas' hero. Havina showed up to Topas' tribunal and revealed her identity as one of the most famous authors in Moclan history. She was using a male pseudonym to publish her work, and after some time she established the sanctuary. Topa watched Havina's testimony at the tribunal to see what a female Moclan was like before reverting the sex reassignment surgery performed on her. So because of this, Grayson manages to convince Bordes to let Topa tag along, and Topa is amazed by the sanctuary, not to mention Havina. However, after gaining Topa's trust, Havina does something incredibly messed up by putting her quote-unquote cause over the well-being of this child. Havina asks Topa to act as an intermediary between the sanctuary and a Moclan mole who is helping them maintain the operation to smuggle females out of Moclus. Shortly afterwards, the Moclan delegation kidnaps Topa because they get wind of this arrangement, and Grayson and Bordes follow the Moclan shuttle's ion trail to a desolate planet, even though the Moclans sabotaged the Union shuttle before they left the sanctuary. That is why Bordes and Grayson are on their own. They have to manually fly the shuttle, and they can't communicate with the Orville. Talking of the titular ship, they eventually find out that Topa's gone missing, but Havina doesn't want to reveal that she was at fault for this, and even when she does admit to what she's done, she refuses to go before the Union Council and testify. Doing that would establish a motive for the Moclans to kidnap Topa, but it would also spell trouble for Havina's cause. Without a clear motive, the Union can't just investigate one of its members, which is why Mercer sends Havina to the simulation room, where she meets her hero Dolly Parton. Dali is as important for Havina as Havina is for Topa, so Mercer flips the script on Havina, and Dali manages to convince Havina to do the right thing in the here and now, because the future has a way of sorting itself out. Dali convinces Havina that you shouldn't sacrifice the present for a better future, and so at the risk of punishment, Havina ends up agreeing to testify. The Union Council is understandably stunned by Havina's testimony, but the Moclan ambassador firmly denies the allegations and berates the council for even considering Havina's accusations as the truth. He argues that, after all, she was the one who broke the agreement, and so the only thing the council should do is to punish her and the sanctuary. Malloy calls out the ambassador and the Moclans in a more private setting. He can't control himself because he views Topa as the little sister he never had, and in fact at the start of the episode she approached Malloy to tell him she had a crush on him, which was a classic embarrassing teenager moment. Anyway, in the meantime, Topa is being tortured in the Moclan black site, and she tries very hard to keep Havina's secret, but that is obviously impossible. After learning what they need to know, the Moclans are preparing to get rid of her, to kill her, but luckily Grayson and Boris raid the facility to rescue her. Boris almost kills Topa's torturer, and Grayson tries to stop him, so Boris doesn't kill the torturer but takes out the only good eye he's got. They make it back to Earth just in time for the Council's final meeting, and thanks to Topa's account of the events, how they tortured her and how they were gonna kill her, revealing the existence of a black site like that, all of that leads the Council to vote unanimously to part ways with the Moclans, and they recognize the Sanctuary as a sovereign state under the Union's protection. Admiral Halsey describes this situation as a messy divorce. The Union will be weaker against the Kaelan threat now, so it'll be crucial for them to convince the Genasi to join their ranks. At the end of the episode, Clyden returns to apologize to Topa. He didn't realize just how much he loved her until her life was in danger, and now he's ready to accept her just the way she is. Grayson joins the Moclan family for a meal, and the atmosphere is a little weird, obviously because of Grayson and Clyden's past, but also because of a moment Boris and Grayson shared earlier on the barren planet. Boris thanked her for taking an interest in Topa after Clyden left, and they almost shared a romantic moment and they almost kissed. But it didn't come to that, and I guess that's not gonna materialize anytime soon with Clyden's return, but I feel like they're setting up an interesting love triangle. The Moclans team up with the Krill in the penultimate episode of the season, while Isaac and Burke work together on the Orville to find a way to defeat the Kaelan. Every single one of them is connected through a synchronization matrix, which is a weakness that can be exploited. It's similar to how when you knock down a domino and all the other dominoes next to it starts falling too, their connectedness is their weakness. And that's why this episode is titled Domino. We see our duo's device in action as it overloads the Kaelan network using quantum energy, and the Kaelan spheres are destroyed. Theoretically, the range of the device is infinite, but the Orville's quantum drive is only powerful enough to demolish the Kaelan in its near vicinity. That is why they have to travel to Earth and hook it up to a more powerful source, while the Union Council decides how they're gonna utilize it. It's also important to mention that Isaac isn't affected by this device because he's no longer a part of the Kaelan network. The Union Council decides that the device should be used as a deterrent because it is against the Union's code to eradicate life, let alone an entire life form, unless it is absolutely necessary. And in this case, killing the Kaelan isn't their only option. They can get them to surrender. That said, convincing the Kaelan to meet is not easy, and the Orville has to use the device multiple times near Kaelan 1 to prove they've got the upper hand. Upon realizing the newfound strength of the Union, Kaelan Primary agrees to meet with them. You might remember that he was killed by Isaac in Season 2, but that's the thing with artificial life forms, they can always come back using a backup. Primary is still hesitant about agreeing to any sort of ceasefire, but he obviously has no choice, so he agrees to the Union's terms, although he makes it clear that they'll find a way to disable the device, and when they do, they'll come after the Union again. Isaac assures them that any attempt to do so will automatically activate the device, but Primary uses Isaac as an example that every system has its faults. Admiral Perry and some other rogue Union officers believe that the ceasefire is a terrible idea, which is why they steal the device and hand it over to the Krill, as they won't even blink before wiping out the Kaelon. That said, they still have to figure out how to use the device, so they'll need some time before activating it. After doing what he thinks is right, Perry intends to turn himself in, but Tlakaelel doesn't let him leave. She wants to keep the Moclan-Krill alliance on the wraps for as long as possible. The Orville eventually discovers the remains of Perry's shuttle, and scans of the area reveal that the Moclans and the Krill are working together. Thanks to Bortus, they know exactly where the device is, because there's only one Moclan scientist who can reverse engineer the device in such a short span of time. The Kaelon and the Union fleets will launch a full-scale attack on the Moclan-Krill alliance, while Primary, Isaac, Burke, Kiali, and Grayson head toward the Moclan facility to retrieve the device. The battle sequence is exhilarating. It is the longest, the most expansive, and the best looking battle in the history of the show. At first the Union ships get overwhelmed and they suffer a lot of casualties before the Kaelon show up to help. They balance the scales a little bit, but as we mentioned, this is just a distraction. The ground team makes its way to the facility, but they are a little too late. The device has already been activated and it is drawing power from the quantum core, so it can't be shut down. The only solution here is to overload the core and destroy it. Doing that would also destroy the entire facility and take out a good chunk of the planet, so the explosion would kill anyone that is still close to the facility, and Burke has to stay behind to overload the core, so she sacrifices herself to save the Kaelon. Burke's journey this season began with her immense hatred of the Kaelon, because they not only killed countless innocent people, but also the love of her life. She was blinded and consumed by that hatred, but Isaac and Timmins proved to her that even the Kaelon deserve a second chance. Wiping them out might be a surefire solution, but a genocidal act like that has other ramifications. You have to consider if the Union would be the same after such an act, or would this be the beginning of their descent into full malevolence? If you decide to take the easy road once, you are probably gonna do it again in the future. So Burke realizes this isn't an isolated decision. It is a massive one that determines who you really are, both as a person and as an organization. She forgoes her desire for revenge, and she even sacrifices herself because she believes this could forever change the Kaelon's perception of biological life form. Luckily, Burke's sacrifice isn't in vain, and the Kaelon do indeed recognize the significance of her actions and how she represents the best of humanity. That is why they agree to ally themselves with the Union, and if both sides are satisfied after a period of time, the Kaelon are set to become a full member of the Union. We should also mention that Tlakaelel is being taken to Earth. She was captured at the Moclan facility, and Mercer wants to know where he can find their daughter Anaya. But Tlakaelel refuses to divulge that information and instead holds fast to her beliefs. The Season 3 finale is a largely uneventful affair. It starts with Bortus and Clyden's marriage renewal ceremony, which prompts Isaac to wonder if he can take his relationship with Dr. Finn to the next level, so he proposes to her. After giving it some serious thought, Finn accepts Isaac's proposal because she obviously loves him, and she also likes the fact that he promised her he would look after the Finn family for generations to come. In the meantime, the Orville returns to Sargas 4, a planet that appeared in Season 1. Sargas 4 has a social credit system, and if your downvotes exceed 10 million, your brain turns into mashed potatoes. So the whole planet is fueled by outrage. Back in Season 1, some Union researchers suffered that fate, and while looking into the situation, Lamar was also a victim too, but the Orville saved them just in time thanks to a local's insight. That local was Lacella, and when the Orville makes its way towards Sargas 4 to check in on a new group of researchers, she contacts the Orville to request asylum because life on her planet has taken its toll on her, and knowing that there's life outside that planet makes her wanna leave. Grayson and Mercer grant her request, but soon afterwards she starts feeling guilty for leaving everyone she knows behind, thinking that she doesn't deserve everything she has aboard the Orville. She also can't comprehend why the Union isn't sharing all its knowledge with developing worlds like Sargus IV, and she even attempts to steal that information after claiming that she wants to go back home. Her attempt is not successful, and Grayson has to teach her why the Union only observes developing nations until they sort themselves out socially. Once upon a time, the Union used to share all their technology when they made first contact, but because those worlds weren't developed enough socially, their rulers used this newly acquired knowledge to consolidate power, and they tore each other apart. They did not use that technology to come together and prosper together. Grayson takes Lacella to the simulator and shows her what happened to Gandhi 3, one of the planets that got worse because of the Union's previous approach. Lacella takes her lesson and decides to stay aboard the Orville. Almost the entire Kaelan fleet shows up to Isaac and Finn's wedding, which goes off without a hitch. Alara makes an appearance as well, and interestingly, as Season 3 comes to an end, Mercer and Grayson hold hands.